The views and opinions expressed on America's Workforce Union podcast and its digital media channels are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the producers or sponsors.
Welcome to the America's Workforce Radio Podcast, the flagship production of the American Workers Radio and Podcast Network, where organized labor and its never-ending fight to protect the rights of the American worker come first. Now, presented by LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America. Here's your host, Ed Flash Ferens.
Nurses in New Orleans ready to strike this week over union retaliation. Meanwhile, a majority of battery workers in Kokomo, Indiana, want to join the United Auto Workers. And today on the show, we talk about federal workers being fired over national security and a noted immigration attorney speaking out on what's going on in America. Welcome to the Monday, July 14th edition of America's Workforce, where we're available on at least 5 platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. We have 2 guests on the show today. Our featured guest is Barry Winograd. Barry has been an arbitrator and mediator of workplace and other civil disputes going back to 1988. He has served on the adjunct law school faculty at the University of California, Berkeley, the University of Michigan, and the University of Pennsylvania. He also served as president of the National Academy of Arbitrators, a senior editor of a treatise on employment law. He's written articles for professional journals in the field, contributed to a number of filings on arbitration. He also served on the California Public Employment Relations Board, and he was an attorney for the United Farm Workers Union. Pretty good credentials there. And today he's going to talk about national security and how that is being used by the Trump administration to fire workers and curb union power. We're hearing it time and time again. The question is, how can they do that? How can they say, like a janitor, and this is a real case. It was a member of the American Federation of Government Employees, a janitor working at the VA. Well, he's got to go because of national security. Go figure. Later in the show, we're going to check in with another attorney, David Leopold. He's based in Cleveland, Ohio. He's a longtime lawyer dealing with immigration matters, focusing on employment, business-related immigration, representation of employers and compliance issues, federal court litigation. He's also the past president and general counsel of the Washington, D.C.-based American Immigration Lawyers Association. He's nationally recognized as an advocate, writer, public speaker, testified on immigration law before Congress. And he also has been on a number of media outlets, including CNN. He's contributed to USA Today and the Huffington Post. And we're going to talk about the Supreme Court decision at the end of June. It was a 6-3 decision, marking a major shift in how federal courts may respond to challenges against nationwide policies, especially immigration law. And what's interesting about this case is that decision came out at the end of June, as I indicated. And then last week, a judge in New Hampshire said, you know what? There's some holes in that. And as a result, class action lawsuits have been filed. So they're tearing apart that decision. He's going to talk about that. Also, what's happening in America with undocumented workers, especially in construction, where contractors are ripping them off on wages. Yeah, well, that's been going on a long time, but now it's escalated as a result of what's going on in Washington. So David Leopold, nationally known attorney, will be joining us as our second guest right here on America's Workforce. Now, a brief look into the world of labor. This segment brought to you by Boyd Watterson Asset Management. You can find more at boydwatterson.com. Nurses at University Medical Center, this is in New Orleans, are moving forward with their strike to protest the health company's retaliation against nurses for their union activity and patient advocacy. The nurses, all represented by National Nurses United, are striking for 2 days starting tomorrow. They are outraged that management has engaged in a troubling pattern of coming after experienced nurses advocating for their patients and coworkers. So they're holding rallies tomorrow and Wednesday. Dana Judkins is an RN in trauma intensive care. She said, singling out pro-union nurses show that the company is using discipline to retaliate against us. So we're striking to let them know we will not tolerate retribution for advocating for ourselves and our patients. Then there's Dorothy Stencil. She's an RN in clinical research. She said patient safety is always nurses' top concern. We're striking because disciplining experienced nurses like this has removed good nurses from the bedside. By the way, the nurses have been in negotiations since March of 2024 for a new contract following their vote to join National Nurses United in December of 2023. We're talking about 600 nurses at that facility. Meanwhile, let's go to California, where registered nurses at the Henry Mayo Newhall Hospital in Valencia, California, have voted overwhelmingly in favor of ratifying a new 3-year contract, winning protections to improve patient safety and nurse retention. Clarissa Velli is an RN in palliative care. She says, we, the nurses of Henry Mayo, are excited to have reached a deal with the hospital. We strongly feel that this contract meets the needs of our patients and community by retaining experienced staff and recruiting new staff. Some of the highlights in the contract include benefits to improve recruitment and retention of nurses, language that improves safe staffing and nurse advocacy, improvement to protected leaves, and this pact goes from now until 2028. Now let's go to Kokomo, Indiana, where a majority of workers at Star Plus Energy there have signed cards to join the United Auto Workers, and the company has agreed to recognize their union. Star Plus, a joint venture between Stellantis and Samsung, stayed neutral during the process and did not stand in the way of the 420 workers who chose to organize. With no threats or pressure, you know that's important. No threats or pressure. Workers came together and won their union as soon as a majority signed cards. Frank Bush is one of the workers at Star Plus, and he said, this is a big deal. We were able to decide our future without intimidation, and now we're on a path to good pay and benefits and respect on the job. So, Star Plus workers are joining a growing wave of union wins across the Midwest and the South. Remember Sean Fain, after he got the contract with the big three, he said, you know what? We're not stopping here. We're going to head to more facilities, especially in the South, and we're going to organize them. So this success follows major victories at other battery plants, including Lordstown, Ohio, Spring Hill, Tennessee, where workers unionized with the UAW and won very strong agreements. David Green, director of Region 2B. David's been on the show a number of times. In fact, we got to get him back. He said the UAW members at Star Plus stood up to make sure battery jobs are good union jobs. Workers in Indiana and across the region know they deserve fair wages, workplace protections, and the dignity that UAW members have been fighting for the last 90 years. As a union family, they need to know that we're going to have their back every step of the way. That plant, by the way, in Kokomo started production earlier this year and is part of a larger expansion of electric vehicle battery manufacturing in the country. Good news there. Real good news. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about a very noted attorney, experienced attorney, and how this administration, the Trump administration, is using national security to fire federal workers. That story right after this on America's Workforce.
This is America's Workforce.
It takes LIUNA to build North America's infrastructure. From roads and bridges to schools and skyscrapers, the men and women of LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, build the projects we depend on. From constructing the Freedom Tower on the site of the former World Trade Center to untangling Washington, D.C.'s congested interstate, LIUNA members do the work that matters. Find out what it takes to be built by LIUNA at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is sponsored in part by Boyd Watterson Asset Management, LLC. Find out more about our investment solutions tailored to meet the needs of Taft-Hartley funds at boydwatterson.com.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy, and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Heat and Frost Insulators Labor Management Cooperative Trust. Find out more at insulators.org/LMCT.
Unions are organizing all across America. New units are being formed and existing units are getting stronger. It's never been a more important or a more challenging job. Broad Stripes is here to help you do it. Broad Stripes is an all-in-one communication and organizing tool. Unions of all sizes rely on us, from nationals like LIUNA and Unite Here to locals throughout the U.S. and Canada. With Broad Stripes, you can text and email your members, create digital membership cards, identify leaders, and build the power you need to win. Check us out at broadstripes.com.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. You can find more at ifpte.org.
This is America's Workforce. More shows available at awfradio.com.
And don't forget, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast. AWF Union Podcast. Everything is archived there. And once again, I got to do a shout out here. Thank you for continuing to make America's Workforce the number one union podcast in America, second year in a row. And all the shows are posted on awfpodcast.com. All right, let's go to our featured guest today. And as you know, there's a lot going on in the federal courts ever since Donald J. Trump took over as president of the United States. A lot of the issues on national security grounds. And joining us as our featured guest today is Barry Winograd. Barry is an arbitrator, a mediator, been dealing with this issue for a long time. Barry, thanks for joining us here on America's Workforce. I see also you're an adjunct law professor. Boy, there's a lot we can talk about, but we're going to focus on what's going on with the so-called tearing up of collective bargaining agreements. But before we do that, I appreciate you coming to the table today. I always like to get more familiar with our guests before we proceed.
Thank you.
And your background, I appreciate what you have done on behalf of working Americans, but getting involved in this field, let's start right there. Go ahead.
Well, way back when, over 50 years ago, I started working in the labor field as an attorney with the United Farm Workers Union in the Central Valley in California. And after several years there, I became an administrative law judge for a California agency that dealt with public sector employees and teaching, state employment, and schools generally, and higher education. And then, about a long time ago, I became an arbitrator and mediator. And as an arbitrator, I resolved disputes as a private judge under collective bargaining agreements and sometimes in the non-union context. And I also serve as a mediator to help resolve disputes. That's the basic distinction, as you probably know, between arbitration and mediation. Mm-hmm. And on the side, I've taught labor law and arbitration at universities at Berkeley, Michigan, and also at Penn now. So, and if you really want to get down and dirty, I have 8 grandchildren, and and they take up a lot of time. It's great, though. They're a lot of fun.
I got you beat on that one, brother. We're at 9 right now.
Oh, good for you. There you go. How's your back doing?
Well, not good, not good. We had 4 of them last weekend for the holiday weekend, ranging in ages from 4 to 14. That was a lot. That was a lot.
It's a lot of work.
At our age, we don't have the stamina that we once had. So anyway, but I love doing this show, and I know a lot about the court because I recently retired from the Cleveland Municipal Court, where I served as public information officer. And to your point, we did a lot with mediation, especially in small claims cases. Nothing on the scope of what you were involved with, but I really enjoyed the court setting. I mean, that's kind of the place where everything should be resolved. Unfortunately, some people are not paying attention to the law these days, and
it's tough. It's tough.
It's real tough. It's got to be very frustrating for you, especially with your background. But let's get into what's going on here. And I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you. American Federation of Government Employees is one of our proud sponsors. And I remember last year, I was so excited to report on this show that the TSA agents finally got a CBA, a collective bargaining agreement. And here's a group that was formed out of 9/11. They did not have rights. They were told by George W. Bush, then the president, that you can't unionize. And finally, Obama comes in there, said, okay, we're going to give you that right. And they were fighting for decent pay, which was atrocious. I mean, many of them making $30,000 a year. I think the ceiling was about 45. It's just ridiculous in today's day. They finally get this good deal. It was a 7-year deal. And then all of a sudden, here comes Trump, and he says, you know what? We're throwing it out.
Actually, the AFG contract with the Department of Homeland Security for TSA personnel was, I think, their 3rd or even their 4th contract. And there were even affirmations of the role of collective bargaining during Trump 1, his first administration. But nowadays, they, I guess, see things differently. So, that CBA, which arises under a different statute than the general federal sector labor relations statute, was the first shot out of the cannon by the Trump administration early in March, or late February, actually, early March. And it was immediately challenged by AFGE. And eventually, earlier in, I guess, end of May, early June, the federal district court judge in Washington state enjoined or struck it down, the action, and very, very clearly on First Amendment grounds, claiming that it was retaliation for AFGE's out front position opposing the Trump administration in a number of areas. But that's just one of 6 pieces of litigation going on around the country involving Trump and his relationship to federal sector employees and bargaining.
Well, you've been at this a long time, as I indicated. And, growing up, contract is a contract. And yeah, I guess every contract can be broken. They usually have to be paid out. How are they able to say this is no good? How I don't understand that part. Can you help me out on that?
Well, they wave a magic wand called national security. Under the main federal law, which has the mouthful name of Federal Sector Labor Management Relations Statute, passed in 1978 during the Carter administration. Under that law, there is specific exemptions for bargaining units. In other words, when you form a bargaining unit, to exclude positions that are involved in national security. And there's also a further proviso, which is wedged into the act, which says the president, in effect, can decree that some agencies or sub-agencies shall be exempt based on national security considerations, if a primary function of the agency is national security. And what has happened over the years is there have been piecemeal removals, I'll say, or exemptions that have been ordered. And then Trump came in, and by executive decree, he determined that about 2/3 of the workforce of federal sector that's eligible to be in a collective bargaining unit were exempt. In other words, he basically swallowed the whole statute, or most of the statute, by this decree. And it was immediately challenged by AFGE and also by NTEU. And then there was a lawsuit filed by the Federal Education Association, which represents a number of teachers at bases and U.S. outposts around the world. So the federal sector labor movement is deeply involved. The AFGE's action involving the executive order also has, I think, 6 other unions that are co-plaintiffs in that proceeding. Now, I assume the federal unions are doing other things as well to organize and agitate, but you might know some of that better than I. I've been focused on the litigation front.
Well, to be honest, I'm so confused with what's going on here because it's back and forth, back and forth. There's one judge said you can do this. There's another judge that says you can't do that. With the TSA situation, I don't know if you're equipped to focus on that one because that was a 7-year deal. It would be 6 more years left on that, my understanding. Is that null and void right now or what?
No, it's actually not stayed, not put in abeyance. The ruling of the Washington court remains in effect, and so does the ruling by the judge in the Northern District of California in the AFGE action there. The government is now seeking a stay from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in that proceeding. There's another proceeding that has been stayed that you might have been thinking about. There was some publicity. That was an action that arose in the District of Columbia. There are actually 2 lawsuits in the District of Columbia, one involving the NTEU, National Treasury Employees Union, and the other involving the American Foreign Service Association, State Department employees. And those actions were, by the Trump administration, were deemed improper by a judge in the District of Columbia. And then the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeal stayed that action. And now the unions are seeking relief from the District of Columbia Circuit Court of Appeal to lift the stay. All of this is preliminary to what may become the involvement of the United States Supreme Court down the road here. And if that happens, because of the talismanic invocation of national security, given some of the actions of the Supreme Court, most recently in the birthright citizenship case, and the case involving the mass layoffs that were enjoined, lifting that or staying that order, I'm not too optimistic if this gets to the Supreme Court on the issues of whether it should be stayed or not. But that's really getting into the weeds.
Yeah.
And if you want to try and, pull some of those weeds apart for your audience, that's fine with me. But I mean, literally, you need a chart to keep track of this litigation and the status of it. And I haven't even talked about the 2 lawsuits that the Trump administration brought against the unions, one against the AFG and one against NTEU, one in Texas, one in Kentucky. The one in Texas is still percolating in the district court, and the one in Kentucky, the judge there actually said, you know what? You don't have standing to the Trump administration. You can't bring this lawsuit. They were trying to invalidate the collective bargaining agreement involving IRS workers in a big IRS operation that's in Covington, Kentucky, I think it is. Anyway, so, I know we only have 10 minutes or so. So, I don't want to really talk about these weeds the whole time, but if you got, shoot away.
Yeah. It's very confusing. And any estimation, I mean, courts, they always say the wheels of justice travel slowly. I'm wondering, some of these have been expedited. Is this going to go on, in your opinion? You've got a lot of experience in this. My gosh, 40 years dealing with this. Is this going to go on for several years, or are they going to try to force all of this to go to the Supreme Court and say, because the Supreme Court already made an opinion just recently about, Trump has the right to fire the federal workforce, or I don't know, how limited that ruling is. You touched on it briefly here, but what do you know about that?
The Roberts Court is actually taking, I'll call it baby steps. I think the Roberts Court has, to the extent possible, avoided a direct confrontation with the Trump administration, with the president. I mean, when the president gets crossed, he just goes on his platform and, starts bad-mouthing people.
Mm-hmm.
So that could happen here. What the Supreme Court has done is made clear that it itself is the supreme law of the land. The birthright citizenship case is a good example because it made it clear that even though the lower courts should not be making a ruling now to enjoin the preliminary implementation of the birthright revocation order, nevertheless, the Supreme Court's edict, when it ever comes down, will be the final word. And it got the Trump administration to agree to that. And I think they're saving themselves for that ultimate stay of the Trump administration, if in fact it comes to that. And in the mass layoff case that you referred to, what it said is the Trump administration could take the preliminary steps, but once layoffs actually happen, then you'll get to the merits of whether the Trump administration was acting lawfully or not. I mean, it's really splitting hairs. And I think there was a dissent by Justice Jackson in the mass layoff case that made it clear that indeed they've already started laying off a number of people and closing agencies. Mm-hmm. And if it takes a year or two to try and get the action reversed, imagine the harm that's going to come to families who are already suffering from these layoffs. I mean, there are issues involving the layoffs that are going to come up under collective bargaining agreements. So that's interrelated with the effort by the Trump administration waving the national security wand to try and wipe out collective bargaining and contracts. A deal is a deal until it's not a deal, according to the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And so there's so much politics involved. I'm not really the prognosticator on that front, but I'm looking at these cases, and it is evident to me that the Supreme Court has been going, as I said, with baby steps in dealing with the Trump administration. And I would think it's going to go on for a while longer,
Well, I noticed that one, dealing with the 14th Amendment, there's holes in that one.
Yes.
And, for class action lawsuits. And in fact, they're moving on that one. It's very interesting what you're talking about. You know what? I got to take a quick break. Joining us as our featured guest today is Barry Winograd, who's been an arbitrator and a mediator of workplace and other civil disputes going back to 1988. He served also on the adjunct law school faculty at the University of California at Berkeley. We'll continue with him right after this. Once again, you're listening to America's Workforce.
This is America's Workforce.
It takes LIUNA to keep America running. Over 70,000 public employees are part of LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, delivering critical services such as healthcare and emergency response, as well as maintaining roads and sanitation systems. Even the National Postal Mail Handlers Union, representing over 47,000 U.S. postal workers, is affiliated with LIUNA. Find out what it takes for LIUNA to keep America running at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
This segment of the show is brought to you by the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. For more information, please visit bmwe.org.
American workers are sick of struggling to get by. It's time to get ahead. In the Teamsters Union, workers are winning industry-leading contracts, historically high wages, fully paid health care, and retirement benefits you can count on. Across the country, Teamsters fight alongside our brothers and sisters to secure a better life. It's what we've been doing and how we've been living for more than a century. When we fight, we win. Join us. Be a Teamster.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the United Steelworkers. You can find more at usw.org. America's Workforce is presented by the Laborers International Union of North America. Feel the power right now at liuna.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Ironworkers. You can find more at ironworkers.org.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And don't forget, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. We always appreciate those 5-star ratings, so please keep them coming. We're talking about the courts and the fight going on between federal employees and the Trump administration. Destination Supreme Court, collective bargaining for federal employees and the First Amendment, national security. If you don't mind, I want to talk a little bit more about that because this administration is hell-bent on busting unions because of national security. And I have to share with you, I read a story. You mentioned the American Federation of Government Employees, and they sent out a press release about janitors at the VA that lost their job because of national security. I'm just scratching my head on that one. And I think that was part of their court case. They say, well, wait a minute. They're a janitor at the VA. Where do you come up with national security concerns on that? But, they're stretching. I think they're throwing everything against the wall here, legally to see what sticks. And some of it right now is some of it's sticking. A lot of it is not sticking. As you pointed out in the first segment, I think the Supreme Court's going to have final say on this piece by piece. But the national security situation, if we could continue on that theme a little bit, is that something that has legs, I guess? I mean, I don't know what other presidents have done. I mean, you go back to the 1980s, you've been teaching, you said, labor law. I'm just wondering if we could do a deep dive on how this has been used in the past. Has it been successful, or is this something that Trump is trying?
It's been successful to a very modest, minimal extent. In other words, previous presidents, Carter, Bush's, Reagan, they've used more of a scalpel approach, looking at an agency, some special branch that deals with intelligence or national security. You can almost tell by the titles in the agency or sub-agency names. Nothing like this has ever happened. The government concedes it. So it's a wand that has been used, and I think it goes hand in glove with what the Trump administration has argued is, and legal people in that field have argued, is the unitary theory of executive power, executive authority. In other words, the president he's not a king, but he's exercises the authority equivalent to that of a king or a monarch, because, and he is able to dictate who can hold a job, for example, running an agency, or like excluding or firing people from the National Labor Relations Board, or the Federal Sector Merit Systems Board, or the Federal Labor Relations Authority. And these cases, the Supreme Court has already indicated they think that the president has this sweeping authority, even though there's precedent dating back almost 100 years that says he doesn't. So, I think they go together. This view of national security and executive authority, that, we should have a president, so it is said, who cannot be impeded or obstructed by unions or by anybody else in terms of exercising this authority. Mm-hmm. Leave aside the separation of powers. The mass layoff case that you were mentioning in the first session, a fundamental rationale of the judge in that case was, Congress always has a say, even if the executive can propose a reorganization of government, agencies shifting personnel or functions around. The Congress pass these laws and fund these agencies, and they have always had a say in how these reorganizations take place. Trump, as the first president, says, no, they don't have any say. I run it. And so what we see in short is just, this problem of an arrogation of power to an individual. Now, some people, I heard somebody on a podcast the other day, a Supreme Court analyst, who was saying, you know what? Part of the reason the Supreme Court maybe is deferring to the president is because the Congress seems to be so ineffective and unable to do things.
Yeah.
Except, I guess, pass bills that give massive tax breaks to billionaires, but that's another subject, right?
Yeah.
We could keep going, right?
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt. Okay. Separate but equal.
Okay.
The three branches: executive, judicial, legislative. And we have seen over the years, it seems like the executive has been getting a little more power Are you going as far as say there's no such thing as separate but equal anymore? What do you say to that?
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, I think even though the Congress is now, under the control of the Trump party or the Republican Party, nevertheless, I think, we have to ensure to the extent we can that statutes passed by Congress, that funding adopted by Congress, that these are given meaning and are not just obliterated because of a presidential say-so. So that's certainly part of the litigation involving federal collective bargaining, because by executive decree, the Trump has decided, well, I'm just going to eliminate this on the grounds of national security. As you said, throwing it up against the wall, seeing if it'll stick, but doing it in such a massive overreach, and for reasons that are obviously retaliatory. I really haven't gotten into that aspect of it. I mean, the executive order is supported by a fact sheet that the White House issued on March 27, which spells out in detail that the action was taken because the unions were filing grievances, and impeding the ability of the Trump administration to do what it wanted. In other words, it had opposition. Heaven forbid that somebody should oppose what the president wants to do. This is what you end up with, right?
Yeah. Well, we're seeing that across the board. The January 6th event, anybody that prosecuted the people on that one, they're now the enemy. I mean, it's got to be discomforting to you spending your entire life in law to see everything reversed right now. The good guys are bad guys. The bad guys are good guys.
Well, leaving that ancient history aside for a second, look, there's a reality, which is that there are few, if any, mass organizations of people who, in this society and system we have, who are capable of pulling together resources in opposition to, a political regression. And unions are basically it. There are nonprofit organizations in environmental protection and things like that, and in different groups, but the main force that exists, and granted not as strong as it might have been 30 or 40 years ago, but it's still a force, and those are unions. And I used to be a union lawyer. I could see what unions have done, and if the president can strip unions of power in the federal sector, that's a big win for him. I'll point something out, by the way. In the federal sector, there are many private contractor or subcontractors who do federal sector work. In fact, there are probably more private federal sector contractors than there are federal employees.
Mm-hmm.
And those private contractors actually still have labor relations rights under the National Labor Relations Act. In fact, I had cases as an arbitrator. I had one particular case as an arbitrator involving the Nevada nuclear test site. Now, want to talk about a national security matter? We didn't even do it on the location of the test site. We did it at a hotel property, and everybody was cautioned not to speak about anything that would be super secret. But there's a case. Now, are these private sector employees still going to have rights, or is Trump at the next step going to say, let's get rid of that too, because they're working for the same agency that can no longer have unionized employees who are federal employees? If you followed that chain of logic, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Right.
He won't stop. There's no question. No question. Barry, you're awesome. Thank you so much for joining us here on America's Workforce.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Can we do this again sometime?
I'd love to.
I appreciate that. You talk about, your history with labor law, and, we need better labor law in this country. Maybe we can talk about that. You hang in there. Thank you so much for joining us today. Barry Winograd, who has been a longtime arbitrator and mediator going back to the 1980s, also adjunct law professor. You take care, stay safe, and stay in touch. Okay, brother?
You too. Travel well. Bye.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. What's happening with immigration and deportation in America? A noted attorney from Cleveland, Ohio, nationally recognized, coming up next on America's Workforce.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
It takes LiUNA to power North America with affordable energy. The men and women of LiUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, have the skills needed to build and maintain oil, natural gas, nuclear, solar, and wind projects that are shaping America's energy future. From new energy tech to retrofitted facilities, LiUNA members do it all. Find out what it takes to be powered by LiUNA at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Communication Workers of America. You can find more at cwa-union.org.
America's Workforce appreciates our sponsor, the Columbus Central Ohio Building and Construction Trades Council, who represents more than 18,000 workers from 19 affiliated local unions and district councils.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by Broadstripes, the digital tool for union organizing and member communication at broadstripes.com.
The Heat and Frost Insulators and Allied Workers are proud to be a title sponsor for America's Workforce Radio. The Insulators Union is leading the way in the mechanical insulation industry, fire stopping, and infectious disease control. Regarded as North America's energy conservation specialists, these professionals are known for their professional work and dedication. You can learn more about the Insulators Union at insulators.org.
America's Workforce Radio is sponsored in part by the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, District Council 6, representing painters, glazers, drywall finishers, and sign and display industry workers. They remind you that belonging to a union is your right as an American.
Now, back to Ed Flash Farrens with America's Workforce.
And don't forget, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast, AWF Union Podcast. Lots going on with regard to immigration in the country, and we have got an expert on our live line today. His name is David Leopold. Been on the show a number of times over the years. David is a longtime lawyer dealing with immigration matters, focusing on employment, business-related immigration, representation of employers in compliance issues, very complex removal cases, including administrative trials, appeals, federal court litigation. David, welcome back to America's Workforce, and there's a lot to talk about, I'm sure. And I have to thank you for carving out some time here, because I know you're very, very busy dealing with this issue. Let's start, if you don't mind, with the U.S. Supreme Court. And, the thing about the law, there's always wiggle room. Even when the Supreme Court issues a decision. And I'm reading about this federal judge, I believe out of New Hampshire, who has barred the Trump administration from enforcing his executive order limiting birthright citizenship across the country. And I guess when the high court came out with that ruling, there were some holes in it. All right. Maybe you could speak to that and how this is affecting you as an immigration attorney. Let's start right there. David, it's all yours, my brother. Go ahead.
Well, good to be back. Thank you, Flash. So, the Supreme Court ruled a couple of weeks ago that, in the birthright citizenship issue, judges couldn't issue nationwide injunctions, generally speaking. But that, like you just pointed out, that generally speaking, it generally means there's a couple holes in there, right? And so this judge in New Hampshire issued a nationwide injunction, meaning that he once again blocked President Trump's executive order, which tries to stop birthright citizenship, meaning that the children of folks in the country without papers and the children of folks in the country who are legally here and visiting are not citizens. So federal judges stopped that. Obviously, we're going to see that run up to the Supreme Court pretty quickly. But I think the takeaway here is that, the Supreme Court's decision of a couple of weeks ago, even though everybody made it sound like it was final and it was anything but. And in the federal courts around the country, the judges are going to be dealing with challenges right and left. And I think it's just going to be much more chaotic, like everything else is right now.
Yeah, very chaotic. I'd like to talk about what's going on with the heavy-handed tactics by ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I know you've been watching what's been going on in Southern California. Mm-hmm. In fact, we just talked about the effect that that's having on the economy there. I mean, either the workers are in jail or else they left or they're hiding. And this is damaging the businesses there. The businesses are, even the real estate developers are trying to get things done. You've got to be getting an earful from them. And I'm just wondering, again, the overreach. What line are they crossing here when they come in and they got masks on? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. There's three basic points here that I think people need to sort of take away from this. Number one, all of this, whether it's the masked agents, whether it's birthright citizenship, whether it's the mass roundup, whether it's sending some innocent guy to El Salvador and locking him up in a gulag, that this is an outright frontal attack on due process. Due process is a fancy legal word, but basically what it means is fairness. What it means is the opportunity to have your case heard by a judge or a jury. And this is an attack on that, and it's an attack on all of our rights. So number two, why is this happening? A lot of it is a deflection from what the other things that are going on that hurts working folks in this country. So, for example, at the same time, they're cutting Medicare benefits, they're cutting health care, they're cutting education, they're cutting the arts, you name it, they're cutting it. And that is going to affect every one of us, right? And meanwhile, they're how are we paying for it? We're paying for it by giving the rich tax breaks, the billionaires. And number three, this is all really ugly stuff. This is not our core American values. This is not what we as Americans were brought up to believe. And we were brought up to believe that if you work hard, you make it in this country. You raise a family, you do right by your kids, you do right by your spouse, it's going to be okay. This is not what we're seeing going on across the country. This is ugly stuff. This is not what we're about. And yeah, you asked about masks. This is not, when you turn on the news, when you read about or you watch tapes from some authoritarian country, whether it's Russia or Maduro's Venezuela, that's where they have masked men in unmarked cars arresting people off the street. And that's not what we're used to, and people are appalled by it. It's really scary stuff. And I think, I think most Americans, obviously Trump got elected fair and square.
Yeah.
But I think when people were voting for him, they didn't imagine this was what was going to happen. I think a lot of folks are surprised.
Yeah. Very much surprised. Well, the last time I checked, this was a nation of laws, and they seem to be ignored. And Trump seems to be ignoring the courts and immigration judges. And now, look, you're a longtime attorney when it comes to immigration, and you would expect these cases to go to court. There's got to be a huge backlog. How is this all affecting you as an immigration attorney trying to get this due process covered? David, what's the answer to that?
Well, I'll tell you what's new and what the effect. I've got, for the first time, Flash, in my career, and I'm not going to admit to you how long that is, but it's long. I got American citizens calling me almost daily. I'm afraid to travel. I'm afraid to go out. I'm afraid that they're going to, American citizens, some born here, some naturalized, who are afraid that they themselves are going to be targeted by some of these masked people. Sometimes their fears are unfounded. Sometimes, there may be something to think about. So I think what's going on is really this instilling of fear. People are worried. People are worried about speaking out. People are worried about doing things that in the past, going to a protest or writing a letter or things like that. People are afraid in a way that they were not afraid before. So this is a very different experience. I've never, in my career before this, had to go to corporations to explain to them search and seizure rules. How far can ICE come in to a company? How far can they go? Can they go into where the employees have lunch? Can they go behind the counters? What are the limits? I mean, these are things that we never used to talk about in the corporate immigration world. And now this is everyday stuff. So this is a whole different paradigm shift. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of it. Well, I know we're just seeing the beginning of it. I shudder to think where this might go if folks don't speak out and stop it.
Yeah. Well, folks are speaking out, and my guess is just not enough right now to put pressure on the administration. David, if you don't mind, I want to talk about the employers out there that have taken advantage of immigrants. And this has been going on for years in this country. And I came across a story recently in The Guardian about what's happening, especially in the construction industry, and how a lot of these employers are ripping off the workers, wage theft, workplace abuse, you name it. I'm just wondering what you're hearing about this situation.
Oh, this is, yeah, for sure. It's a look, the unscrupulous employer is having a field day with this, right? Because I pick up the phone, I call ICE if you don't do what I want you to do. And, the thing is, this screws all American workers, because if they did something smart, like put in a well-designated legalization program for folks who have been here a long time, who've worked hard, who've paid their taxes, who are willing to pay a fine, that makes some sense. And I think everybody would register. Everybody would run to register if it meant that they could come out of the shadows. And when they're in the shadows, it hurts American workers, like you just point out, because it lets employers, exploit people and pay them less wages, which brings down the wages for everybody else. So, I think study after fancy study has shown that if we go that route, we're going to increase wages and working conditions for everybody. So, all the money and all of the billions and all of the masked men and so on and so forth, all the effort that they're putting into this to arrest dishwashers and waitresses and day laborers, they could be putting into a smart program to fix this system so that we can function and we can have the right number of workers, tie it to the whatever. But let's have a smart system, not this crazy draconian chaos of arrest.
Well, smart things often don't happen in Washington. I think you know that by now, David. Right. And if you don't mind, yet the answer to all of this is immigration reform. There was a time, remember the Gang of Eight?
I do.
That was some years back, and they had it. They had a bipartisan deal to deal with immigration in this country, and it never went anywhere. Do you think that's by design? They don't want to fix immigration? What's your opinion on that?
I think that's a really good question, Flesh. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, I think there's been this, whether it's overt or whether it's just sort of, I think there's sort of unwritten contract, right? And the Dems are involved and the Republicans are involved. You got fault on both sides here. You've got a whole undocumented class of people in this country who are, subject to exploitation and lower wages in exchange for lower enforcement. And I think that, everybody's been benefiting from that situation.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, what has to happen is that Congress, people who are concerned about their own jobs, it's in their interest. It's in everybody's interest to get, to fix the damn system already.
Yeah.
Rather than screw around every 10, 15 years and then, do this mass deport, all this kind of stuff. What does it do to, lower the price of eggs? Nothing. To the contrary, right? People voted because of inflation in the election. That's how Trump got elected. None of this is doing anything to lower prices. To the contrary, less workers, higher prices. So I think we need to get smart, but we're not going to get smart unless the American people speak out, and everybody listening to this show has power, They have power with a voice. They have power by talking to their neighbors, by talking to the folks who they work with. Everybody's got a say, I don't care, I don't care what the elites can always be beaten by the people. And I know that may sound crazy and radical. It's not. It's common sense.
Well, history has proven you're right about that. Take a look at the Great Depression when things were so bad. That's when unions got very, very vocal, very, very loud.
Yes.
And you go back to the 60s in Vietnam, similar situation there. And it changed the mind of the president, who was LBJ at the time. So, yeah, power to the people, no doubt about that. We're going to leave it on that note. David Leopold, longtime lawyer, nationally known for immigration and immigration rights. I mean, you might have seen him on a couple of shows like CNN, also USA Today. He's been quoted in Huffington Post as well. So you take care. I know you're busy. Thank you for carving out some time here on America's Workforce. Okay, brother?
Oh, thanks for having me, Flash. Always a pleasure.
And that'll be it for another edition of America's Workforce. Coming up tomorrow, the Ohio Federation of Teachers. That and more. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.
That That concludes another episode of the America's Workforce Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. America's Workforce is a production of Labor Tools and BMA Media Group. Find out more information online at labortools.com.